At UC Davis, the animal rights protesters shut down experiments designed to determine the force that it took to break bones in animals. Nowhere in the United States have we found research on the force that it takes to break bones or cause a subdural hematoma or other similar injury to children. This lack of research leaves the field wide open for hysteria and junk science. Let me tell you about a case. We represented someone that had run away days before their trial. He was caught 4 years later. He ran because he knew he was going to get convicted, even though he was innocent. In that case, the prior defense attorney had not prepared the medical aspects of the case. The child, who was about 1 month old, had a spiral fracture of the femur. The father had been accused of torture of the child and was facing life in prison. The defense attorney had found no explanation and no research to support a defense. He didn't do his own medical research. The only doctor that he talked to said that it was the worst case of child abuse that the doctor had ever seen. I remember having seen that same doctor testifying against me in a broken bones case many years earlier. That doctor used the same line about it being the worst case she had ever seen. Well, this 1 month old child's injury were actually 3 to 4 weeks old. That would place it back at the time of birth, especially since the leg had not been immobilized and therefore would have been continuously under stress, thereby slowing the healing process. The police officer interviewed the pediatrician, and it was on tape. It went something like this. "Oh, the birth of the child couldn't have caused this injury, could it, doctor?" And the doctor responds, "Oh, of course not." And that was the end of the investigation into whether or not the child was injured at birth. We looked into the possibility that the doctor was the cause of the injury. When we got the case, we went through and got the birth records, and the records showed that it was a breech birth. What had happened is that the doctor had cut the membrane and reached up inside of the pelvis of the mother and rotated the child by the legs and pulled the child out, or extracted the child. So what we had was a rotation of the legs and an extraction. That is the type of motion that it takes to create a spiral fracture. Next, we did our own research and found out that hospitals were stopping this procedure due to injuries in children. And as we read the different articles that had to do with changing of the hospital procedures, it turned out that some of the injuries that were caused by this rotation procedure were spiral fractures, and those fractures occurred approximately 2/3 the way up the femur between the knee and the hip. That's exactly where the fracture occurred in this child. Our research was then given to a doctor who was a specialist on difficult deliveries, and he was prepared to be our expert witness. Copies of the study were then sent to the district attorney, and we highlighted in yellow those things that had to do with spiral fractures of the femur. The child abuse charges that carried life in prison were dismissed without a trial. Going on to another area, we have found that research that was performed on animals is hard to come by because of animal rights activists. And within the United States, research on forces required to break children's bones and cause subdural hematoma is virtually non-existent. However, we have found in Europe that there is such research, and we maintain a library of that research. Now, some of this research was actually done in German and was done on the body of deceased children. We had to have it translated so that we would know what kind of forces it took to create these injuries. We would then take this research and show it to our experts, who usually had never heard of research of this type and had never even seen it. Our experts basically responded that they were emotionally disturbed that such research even existed. However, once they got over the emotional shock of this research, they realized how invaluable this data was in finding the truth. Here is a short clip from one of our videos used to train lawyers and judges on this issue.